Hello and welcome to Writing While Distracted, the writing podcast that helps you transform your scattered thoughts into literary brilliance. I'm your host, Brenda Murphy, your NeuroSpicy writing coach. Stay tuned as we discuss genre conventions, continuity, and research. Hello, fellow writers, and welcome back to Writing While Distracted. And today we're going to dive into the part of the revision process that I believe goes together in that each thing is influenced by the other thing. They kind of nest inside of each other. And what I'm talking about are genre conventions, continuity, and research. And they're all influenced by each other. And we're going to start off by talking about genre conventions, which often receive a bad rap. A lot of people feel like they're constraining. They feel like they're locked into them. But here's the thing. Genre conventions are guidelines. You have expectations, readers have expectations of what genre is about. If you're reading a cozy mystery, you're expecting an amateur sleuth, you're expecting a cozy community, tight-knit community, and a murder that may be, while it may be brutal, is not necessarily shown to be brutal on the page, versus a thriller where oftentimes you see very brutal elements. That's not to say that there couldn't be a cozy thriller, but I don't think that it would meet anyone's expectations as far as a blend goes. There are certain genres that are going to blend together, which might be unusual, but will be readable. And I'm thinking specifically of the genres of cozy fantasy stories, where folks are not necessarily into a lot of the on-page violence and drama that goes into a lot of fantasy stories. They want a cozy fantasy story, and I get that. And I've read a couple, and they're very entertaining, and the kind of read that you just want to get under a blanket and get a beverage of your choice and curl up on a rainy afternoon. And that's fantastic, because until recently, when you wanted to read fantasy and disappear into that kind of a world, you were kind of stuck with all the parts that maybe weren't really appealing to you. So don't be afraid to blend genres. And as neurodivergent writers, specifically, I think that we often are able to hold on to many different concepts and many different ideas all at the same time. We're not always able to articulate those ideas and concepts. But I think if you lean into that and appreciate that about yourself, if you find things that you enjoy about different genres, go for it. Think of genre conventions as the outline in a coloring book. You can color inside the lines if you want, but you don't have to. You can color outside the lines, but don't go so far outside the lines no one knows what it is that you're writing. If you're writing a romance, knowing that you're going to have two or more people fall in love, if you're writing a poly romance, it would be more people, is your endpoint. And in a way, it's freeing. You know what the end of your story is. It's either happy or happy for now. And you can lean into that. And you can do all kinds of things with your characters between the beginning of the story and when they get to the end of the story. You don't have to follow a set pattern unless you're writing for a house or a publishing house that requires a set pattern. And I'm looking at Harlequin romance, which for years, if you read a Harlequin romance, you knew the beat points and you were expecting them. And there were a lot of people who enjoyed that because whatever else was going on in their lives, they really enjoyed knowing and having those expectations met of the story. So there's a place for that. The marvelous thing about books is that people can find books to meet whatever desire they have when they sit down to read a book. And you can fill in some of those spots by blending genres, by leaning into it, by turning genre conventions sometimes on their heads while still meeting the key parts of the genre. So take advantage of your different viewpoint of life and lean into that. The takeaway from all of this is to know what the conventions are around genre. but feel free to bend and twist them in whatever way you like. Think of them as guidelines, not absolute dictates. So now we're going to move on to story continuity. And this is where you keep your storyline, the threads of your story intact. And in continuity, some people are like, well, what exactly are you talking about when you say continuity? What I'm referring to is that your characters, the settings, the events are consistent. The details are consistent. Your character has the same hair color unless you show them dyeing their hair. They have the same eye color. They have the same house unless you show them moving. I mean, things like that. Or length of times. We've all had the experience of reading a book where the character's hair color changes from blonde to brown with no explanation, or that someone has a major injury, say they break their leg, and 2 pages later, without any explanation, they're walking around on it, instead of showing us the time that went into the healing and the process. The readers have to know, otherwise it's very jarring and it will yank your readers out of the story. And you may think that readers don't pay that much attention to details, but I can assure you from letters that I've received, emails rather, that I've received, that people do notice if you blow the continuity. So do yourself a favor and try and keep up with that. Now, here is the part that's difficult for most neurodivergent people. Our brains don't work like everyone else's. And it can be a real struggle to keep track of all those details. 2 tools have been super helpful for me: Milanote and Scrivener. They may not be for everybody. I also have used a spiral notebook to keep track of details. And I will leave links below for Milanote and for Scrivener. Check them out. They have free trials. Check them out. Try them out. See if they work for you. Scrivener, I've talked about before, it lets me stick in there every single odd bit of weird research and details that I need to in order to keep myself on track and keep my stories consistent. It keeps track of timelines and characters and key plot points, and so I don't accidentally give someone blue eyes in one chapter and 10 chapter later give them brown eyes. The thing that will also help you with continuity is having attentive beta readers. I am blessed with beta readers that will totally flag continuity errors if they see them when they're reading. And that's a blessing. It saves me time. I can go back and fix it before I send it to my editor. And I like to send my editor as clean a copy as I can because they're going to catch the next stages of continuity. Your copy editors are going to catch those continuity errors that maybe your beta readers didn't see and that you didn't see. It takes multiple passes from multiple people to really ensure the continuity of most books, unless you are an incredibly detailed, focused person. Most neurodivergent people that I know fall into 1 or 2 categories. They're either very detail-oriented and they would never have a continuity error because their brains are very, very good at picking up differences and things that are wrong or changes that they made that they didn't mean to. There are those of us like myself that my brain is a basket of kittens trying to get out most days, and I struggle with continuity. Whichever camp you fall into, use those tools to help yourself find a way to do it. It could be, like I said, it can be as inexpensive as a notebook and as simple as a notebook, where you write down those things that are important about your character and keep them in one place so you don't have to go back, if you're writing a series, and read through the entire series to see what color eyes your character has. The other thing about writing a series is that is a huge amount of continuity and keeping track of your characters. If you're writing a series, I am going to suggest that you make master character sheets that you keep all the information about that character in one place. And again, it can be a spiral notebook, but keep track of those characters so that if you're writing and you're in revisions, and don't do this while you're writing, if you can't remember the eye color and you're worried, you're questioning yourself, just write the eye color down that you come up with, put brackets around it, and say, check this. Anytime that I'm working on a series book and I have questions about what I called something or how I referred to something or what color somebody's eyes were, their hair color, I put little brackets around it and say, check this. Same goes for spelling. I write a fantasy series. Am I spelling their made-up names correctly throughout the series? That's super important because in a fantasy series, you create entire towns and worlds and civilizations and objects and people and animals that have unique names. You need to keep track of those. Make a list. Either do a Word document or keep it in a notebook. I suggest a Word document of all of those things that are unique names for your world, because when you send your book off to your editor, you're going to want to send them that list because otherwise they're not going to know if you spelled something right or not. Is this a typo? Is this how this is spelled? Who knows? But having that list will help you, when you're in revisions, go through and make sure that you've got the names spelled correctly, that you've got the places spelled correctly. It's a lot. And again, revisions can seem really overwhelming. And this is another one of those places where I'm going to suggest that you take time, that you dedicate however much time you have to just doing revisions. Don't work on new writing, don't work on new books. But if you're revising a book, focus on revising that book, that one book, so you can get it off your desk and get it out to your editors. The other thing that I'm going to suggest is that when you're writing your manuscript and when you're making those notes to yourself, if you have an idea of where you might find that information, include that in your bracketed note to yourself. And I've spoken before that when I write my first draft, anything that I'm going to have to look up or research, I enter that in brackets, and I consistently use brackets so that when I get to the end of my document, I can search for bracketed content, and then I can have a whole list of what things I need to research or look up as I'm writing my manuscript. But it doesn't derail me while I'm writing my first draft. And that's the thing. You don't have to worry about it while you're writing. You can fix those in revision. Don't interrupt your writing process to go down the rabbit hole of looking up things that you need to know in previous parts of your manuscript. Just write what you're thinking in the moment and fix it later. Don't give away your writing time to editing. It's two different mindsets, creative mindset versus the analytical editorial mindset. So don't do that. To be clear, the thing that you can do to help yourself the most with consistency is to create some kind of, they've been called story Bibles or a master sheet of characters, notes, whatever you need to do. Keep it in one place, keep it in a place you can find it. Be as consistent as you can. And again, as a neurodivergent person, consistency can be hard. That's why I suggest simpler methods, either doing it right inside the manuscript or in a notebook on your desk. In Scrivener, I love Scrivener for that fact. There is when I'm working on a page of the manuscript, I can write whatever notes I need to write to myself about what I need to look up in a little column on the left that I can go back to. There are so many tools out there to help you. Check out Milanote, check out Scrivener. Go get yourself a spiral notebook if you're struggling with continuity. Just keep it by your desk when you make up a character. And sometimes we make up characters on the fly because we're pantsers. We don't plot. We're just making it up as we go along. Write little details about those characters in your notebook, in your spiral notebook. So then later, when you need to figure out, well, did they have long hair? Did they have short hair? What kind of person are they? Did they have a tic? Did they have something that's identifying, a little habit? You can go back to your notebook and find that information. All right. So we've talked about genre conventions and we've talked about continuity. And now we're going to talk about research. And research for neurodiverse people, it's hard sometimes to do a deep dive into research without drowning in the amount of material. And we tend, a lot of us, to hyperfocus and become so absorbed in what we're doing, we lose track of time. And we are so interested in a topic, we can find ourselves becoming just obsessed with it. I mean, I know there are many of you out there that you've started Googling online to find one fact, one tiny fact, and you end up 3 hours later knowing everything there is to know about plumbing and how to become a plumber and how many hours it takes to take the test. So much details about plumbing that you're probably, unless you're going to be a plumber, never use. Because as much as we love research, only a fraction gets into our stories. No one wants to read the amount of detail that you're going to know about a specific area if they're reading your novel. They're reading a novel for fun, not education, although it is nice to put in little tidbits that people may learn as they read. A lot of people who write historical novels sometimes will have notes in the back about events that they base their novel on, and I always find that fascinating. But they do not interrupt their manuscript and their storytelling to present 5 pages on how matches came into being. Pay attention to that and separate your research time from your writing time. This, I think, derails more people in writing their first draft than just about anything. The ability to flip over into a search engine and look up questions that you have while you're writing your manuscript. I'm going to suggest 2 ways to deal with that. 1, that spiral notebook next to your desk. And I'm not saying doing it in a document. If you need to do it in a document, if you need to dictate, do it that way. I choose a spiral notebook because I work with my manuscript filling my entire computer screen so that I'm not distracted by any other applications that I might slip into to distract me or derail me, because it is a small step from Googling something to just popping over to check your social media account or anything else that you happen to find distracting in the moment. That spiral notebook is your best friend, or composition book, or index card, whatever piece of paper, it doesn't matter. Keep it next to your desk. If you have a question that you bump into while you're doing your first draft, like when were matches invented, write that down so that you can research it later. Research brain is not the same as manuscript brain, is not the same as revision brain or editing brain. Those are very different skill sets. Creative writing is not research. Research feeds into your creative writing. Knowing when those things happened can lend veracity to your manuscript and make it believable. And that's what you want. You want the little parts, especially if you're writing contemporary novels, you want things to be real and to actually happen. If you're writing historical fiction, even though the story is fictional, you want to stay consistent with your time period and do research so you can put those events into your story that make it much more entertaining and relatable and real. And that's what we're going for here. If you're writing, whatever you're writing, you want it to feel real. If you're writing science fiction, even though you can be creative about the science that you put into it, underneath all of that is some foundation of real science in the real world. And that's what you want to look at. Even if you're creating a magical system, sometimes it's good to do research to see what people have already done. 1, because you don't want to plagiarize, and 2, use your innate creative ability to come up with something completely different, or to stay within guidelines. A big thing in most magic systems is that all magic has a cost. And you see that repeated over and over and over in magical tales or tales where magic is present. Doing research about what kinds of magical systems have been written will help you to create a unique magic system. How do I deal with research? I'm not one of those people that does a ton of research before I start to write a book. I will occasionally, if I have characters that have an occupation that is far outside of occupations that I've had, or are unique occupations where what they do is something of a mystery to me, like what exactly do you do in that occupation, I will spend some time researching that. All of those things lend veracity and a feeling of realness to your books. And that's important. And research fits into genre conventions, fits into continuity, in that if you're writing historical fiction, people expect the story to be based somewhere in some history. If you are writing a detective thriller, people want you to not write a detective that goes so far outside the lines they can't even imagine that would actually occur. When people read a murder mystery, they want to believe that however you've written it might have actually occurred. And again, this is research, which is why writers are always worried if their search history is ever made public, because we will research things like how long does it take a certain poison to act? What happens to a body when it's been buried in the ground? We research a lot of odd things. And at the same time, It's that research that is so critical to making your books readable, relatable, something that a reader will come back to. So remember, just because you spent hours learning how to light a fire doesn't mean that you need to include every single step in your book. Keep the focus on what will move the story forward and what will make your story feel real to the reader. Use your research to enhance your plot and your world building, not derail your story. Now, if you do fall down the research rabbit hole, and that shouldn't happen if you are separating your research time away from your writing time, don't beat yourself up. We are curious by nature. Neurodivergent folks will focus and fixate on some of the most unique things in the world because that's who we are. And that's a strength. Lean into your strength, but make sure that your research doesn't derail you from finishing your story. I know too many people who've spent years researching a novel they still haven't written. You don't have to know every single thing before you start writing. I'm going to suggest that if you are doing research before you have written your manuscript, that you put a deadline on your research, just like you're going to put a deadline on your manuscript to make yourself get the job done. Set it up like a regular appointment, like you would anything else. Treat it as sacred time and give it space in your world. Just like when you go to write your manuscript, you give it space in your world. You're going to make a certain time or certain times during the day when you're going to focus on writing your manuscript. Make certain times during the day that you just focus on research. Don't try and combine the two. It is a sure way to derail yourself and get lost in the details before you hit the end. To wrap up, neurodivergent writers have an amazing toolkit to work with. Our hyperfocus, our ability to think outside the lines, our creativity, and the things that we do struggle with can be genre conventions because we hate to be told what to do, a lot of us, and because our brains don't necessarily see the world that way. Continuity can be a struggle depending on your particular brand and flavor of neurodiversity. And research can be our best friends and also our arch nemesis. And the trick is to find the balance at the center of it. As neurodivergent writers, we have unique brains. We see the world differently, and that's what makes our stories stand out. We might struggle with the things I've just mentioned, but we also have incredible creativity and an instinct to break the mold. So do it. Don't be afraid. Don't back off and not write because you think you can't meet expectations of a certain genre. Bend those expectations. Create a world that is yours and yours alone, and get in there and have fun. That's the biggest thing. If you're not having fun writing your manuscript, you're doing it wrong. Writing, although difficult, should never be miserable. I don't believe in that. I believe that you should write what makes you happy and what brings joy to you. And if you don't like what you're writing, it is perfectly fine to stop and start again. Start writing something that will bring you joy, that will make you happy, not because it's the latest thing and everybody's writing whatever is popular in the moment. Don't worry about that. Write the book that you want to write. Write what makes you excited to sit down at your keyboard whenever it's time to write. In this podcast, I'm going to offer a little challenge. If you've been struggling with one of these issues, genre conventions, continuity, or really just overwhelmed yourself with research, I'm going to suggest you pick one of the tools that I've listed in the show notes and give that a try. Scrivener has a real 30-day test drive wherein it's 30 days of use, not 30 calendar days. Milanote has a free version of it. Try it out. See if it'll work for you. And if they do, take advantage of it. Okay, that's it for me today. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. And if you like this episode, please be sure to subscribe and leave a review. It really helps me get the podcast in front of more people. Join our community. I have an email news list, and you can find that in the show notes. There are a number of free helpful guides that you can pick up, such as my character workbook, a list of 60 ways to show character arc, a bunch of different things. And I will list all of those below and pick up the one that most appeals to you. Until next time, keep writing. Thanks for tuning in to Writing While Distracted, where we navigate the winding roads of creativity amidst the chaos of distraction. If you've enjoyed this podcast and found it useful, share it and tag me, DM me, and let me know what you found most useful. Please leave a review. It really helps get the podcast in front of more folks. Remember, in the dance between focus and diversion, every stumble is a step closer to mastering the art of writing. Join us next time as we continue to unravel the mysteries of the writer's mind. Until then, keep writing, keep wandering, and embrace the distractions that fuel your creativity. Stay tuned, stay inspired.